Tonight on PrimeTime, Brussels under siege. Belgium's Prime Minister has convened an emergency security meeting after multiple unidentified drones forced the closure of Brussels airport. EU officials are now fast-tracking plans for a continent-wide drone wall to shield Europe from deadly aerial attacks. Drones over Europe then, but how exposed is Brussels? Good evening. In Brussels, flights have resumed, but the alarm remains. Belgian security teams are reviewing radar data while EU ministers push to deploy this drone wall across member states. Now, this scare has laid bare Europe's new reality. Borders, well, they can be protected, but policing the skies, that's become a different game.
A sudden swarm of drones over Belgium's skies has triggered an emergency response, closing the country's main airports and even a military base for several hours. Authorities say the incidents could be part of a growing pattern of hybrid attacks spreading across Europe.
I think that we need more counter-drone capabilities, and that's what I'm suggesting. I have a concrete plan. I will come to that. I'll bring it to the table today and tomorrow for the Council of Ministers.
Defence Minister Theo Franken says Belgium is preparing a new national plan to strengthen counter-drone defences. The Interior and Mobility Ministers also called for tighter detection systems and stronger coordination at the European level.
We need to take stock of what already exists and see how we can improve detection and enforcement, knowing that everything is interconnected and depends on European directives.
Drone incursions have already forced temporary shutdowns at airports in Brussels, Antwerp, Liège and Ostend, as officials warn the incidents may not be isolated. Across Europe, reports of Russian drone incursions have surged in recent weeks. Poland, Estonia and Lithuania have faced direct airspace violations. Denmark, Germany and Spain saw airports disrupted, while Romania, Norway and the Czech Republic reported unidentified drones near military or border zones. NATO says it's now reinforcing defences from the Baltic to the Black Sea. NATO has since reinforced air defences on its eastern flank, deploying F-35 and F-16 fighter jets, helicopters and Patriot missile systems across Poland, Romania and Denmark in a bid to deter further Russian provocations.
Well, joining me now to discuss this further is our correspondent, Katie Wilson. Katie, thanks for joining us. Just walk us through this sequence then. When were the drones first spotted? How long was traffic halted? And what's the status now?
Yeah, that's right. So suspected drone sightings disrupted flights at airports across Belgium on Tuesday and into Wednesday. There were no flights departing or arriving from Brussels airport. That's the country's busiest. Early on Wednesday, the airport said that the flights had been resumed, but warned that disruption for travellers was expected to continue and passengers should be prepared for delays across the day. All in all, 95 flights were cancelled, including more than half after the airport reopened because many planes were in the wrong place. Due to the disruption, around 500 people spent the night at Brussels airport, and this isn't just in Brussels. Officials at Belgium's second largest airport, Charleroi, said air traffic was briefly halted there as a precaution, and these flights had initially been diverted to Liège before that airport also closed due to suspected drone sightings, and flights were even being diverted to airports in the Netherlands like Eindhoven and Maastricht. So it was really significant disruption here across the country.
And have the authorities said any more about the drones themselves, where they were flying, how high they were flying, some of those details?
So it's not yet clear how many drones might have been involved or even the nature of the drone incursion, but what we do know is that the Defence Minister Theo Franken told Belgium's public broadcaster that the incident appeared to be carried out by professionals intent on destabilising the country. Those were his words. And we can see that authorities are taking this very seriously. Bernard Quentin, the Minister of the Interior, has asked the Prime Minister to convene the National Security Council today, as you mentioned in your introduction, in response to this sighting. He said, "We will not allow our airports to be disrupted by uncontrolled drone flights. This calls for a coordinated national response." And this isn't just affecting airports. It's worth pointing that out as well. Tuesday was the fourth night in a row that the Belgian authorities reported drone sightings over Kleine Brogel, a major military base near the Dutch border. Belgium's defence minister said an investigation was underway, calling it a clear mission targeting that military base. He wasn't giving too much away, but he did tell Belgian radio that it looks like an espionage operation, but he said he wouldn't speculate on who's behind it. He said, "I have some ideas, but I'm going to be cautious."
Interesting. And Katie, I think a lot of people watching will be wondering, well, what happens? A country like Belgium, you spot these drones. What sequence of events is kicked off? What's the protocol? Do you try and attack the drone? Do you make sure that people take cover? What's the process?
So we do have a sense of how the Belgian authorities responded to this incident. As I mentioned, there was that National Security Council meeting today, and we know the outcomes of this now. So the priority, they say, is the National Air Security Centre, which is being strengthened and should be operational by the beginning of next year. And their priority is to make that operational as quickly as possible. They've also brought in some changes, and the National Security Council has decided that all drones and their pilots must now be registered. And if they're not registered, the drone will be automatically considered as hostile. Now, this registration wasn't mandatory before, but now it is. And there is clear guidance here that any drones disrupting Belgian airspace should be shot down. So that's their policy. But there is speculation on how effective this will be, this registration, because if you're going to fly a hostile drone, you're probably not going to register it, are you? So it's not going to make it any easier to detect the drone, but it will make it easier for security services to have that green light to take action and to take them out of the air. The Minister of Defence has also said he's working on an action plan and wants to invest in anti-drone equipment. And it's worth pointing out also that the Minister of the Interior has called for calm and stressed that the situation is under control.
Something else there's also naturally lots of speculation on, lots of innuendo, euphemism, social media awash with people's views, is who's behind this? Is there any definitive sense yet from the government, from intelligence services, perhaps from the EU, on definitively who they believe is to blame for this?
Well, not in regards to the incident at Brussels airport just yet, but we do have a bit of a clearer picture to the suspicious drones spotted above Belgian military bases over the weekend. The Defence Minister stopped short of attributing the latest drone incursions in Belgium to Moscow, but he did hint that there were a few other obvious culprits. He said the Russians are trying to do this in all European countries. Is it the Russians now? I can't say that, but the motives are clear and the ways of doing things like this are also very clear. Now remember, Belgium is home to NATO HQ in Brussels, and this isn't the first time that we're hearing of incidents like this. Both NATO and the EU have been on high alert following a string of airspace violations thought to be from Russia in recent weeks. There's been disruptions at airports across Europe, including Munich, Copenhagen, Oslo, and think back to September when 20 Russian drones entered Polish airspace and 3 Russian military jets violated Estonia's airspace for 12 minutes. So there is that growing fear and that growing speculation that Russia is testing NATO's resolve with escalating airspace violations and drone incursions. But it is worth mentioning that the Kremlin denied involvement in those incidents across Europe.
Now, there's a lot of talk about this so-called drone wall, presumably not a physical wall. What is the drone wall and how effective is it likely to be?
Yeah, you're right, not a physical wall, but rather a layered network of detection and interception systems, building on individual EU members' anti-drone capabilities. And the hope is that by expanding the network of sensors along NATO's eastern flank, countries will be able to identify and track potential drone incursions more effectively. Now, the idea was announced, as I mentioned, as a number of European countries reported incursions into their airspace, with most pointing the finger at Russia. President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has said it's about Europe delivering a strong and united response to Russia's drone incursions at our borders. And she added that the EU needs to work together with NATO and Ukraine to implement this. And Ukraine will be key here if we're talking about a drone wall. They're the most experienced country in Europe when it comes to drone and counter-drone warfare. The defence landscape is changing as a result of what we see in Ukraine. Previously, NATO's air defence was pitted against fast-moving air threat, aircraft missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, but not specifically against drones. So Ukrainian advisors and expertise could help the rest of the continent understand the best way to fight back against Russian drones. And Zelensky has said this himself, that the expertise of Ukrainian professionals and Ukrainian technology could become an important part of the EU's drone wall initiative. So what could this actually look like and how long will it take to implement? Well, German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius warned that the development of a drone wall could take at least 3 or 4 years. Latvia's Prime Minister was more optimistic. She thinks it could be implemented quicker than that. But drones, they're small, they're cheap, and they're able to carry out significant damage. So they're able to propose a disproportionate threat to these countries in Europe. And as well as being able to cause physical damage, drones can be used for surveillance and also carry out a risk of colliding with aircraft while in the sky. And NATO's Secretary General Mark Rutte, so he supports this drone wall initiative, and he says it's both timely and necessary, citing cost as a crucial reason to develop this. He says, in the end, we cannot spend millions of euros or dollars on missiles to take out the drones, which are only costing a couple of $1,000s. So this is certainly something that we're not going to be hearing the last of.
Yeah, fascinating but worrying sign of things to come. Katie, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, time for a short break now. Coming up next, a long-awaited rail revival could mean regional trade booms in cross-border initiatives and peace efforts in the South Caucasus.
Partnership with Azerbaijan will allow Israel also to enjoy some of the benefits.
What makes Azerbaijan a uniquely strategic partner for Israel?
Peace process with Armenia, which will bring more and more stability to both countries.
One of the key elements of that Donald Trump's Gaza ceasefire agreement is delivery of the humanitarian aid to Gaza.
More and more humanitarian aid entering Gaza from various checkpoints. We cannot allow a terrorist organization to sit on our borders.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Ainu.
Welcome back. Now, for the first time in over 30 years, cargo trains are rolling once again between Azerbaijan and Armenia, a route once frozen by conflict, now reopening through cooperation. Baku's move to lift transit restrictions marks a rare moment of progress and perhaps the start of regional reconnection. A-News's Aysel Abrahimova reports.
As Azerbaijan lifts restrictions on freight transit with Armenia, a new route is emerging that strengthens regional connectivity. Today, one of the first trains to Armenia passes through this railway via Azerbaijan.
The restored Azerbaijan-Armenia cargo transit passage has reopened a key regional transport route linking Kazakhstan, Russia, Azerbaijan, Georgia and Armenia. The move marks a significant milestone after 35 years of closure between the two countries. President Ilham Aliyev made the announcement removing this restriction during his state visit to Kazakhstan last month.
I must also note that Azerbaijan has lifted all restrictions on cargo transit to Armenia that had been in place since the occupation. The first such transit shipment was a delivery of Kazakh grain to Armenia. I believe this is a clear indicator that peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia is no longer only on paper, but also in practice.
On Thursday, a train carrying Kazakh wheat to Armenia passed through Azerbaijan via Baku, marking the second batch of grain transported along this route.
Yesterday, a train carrying nearly 1,000 tons of grain in 15 wagons arrived at the Yalama station in Azerbaijan from Kazakhstan. 15 of those wagons have already reached the Bilachari station. The train will continue its route along the Bilajari-Hachigbul line. From there, the cargo will be transported through Georgia and into Armenia. It should also be noted that in the next stage, additional shipments of cargo are planned to be sent from both Russia and Kazakhstan.
The batch, which transited through Azerbaijan a day earlier, has already arrived in the country. Armenia's Minister of Economy described the development as a historic milestone for the nation.
First of all, it should be noted that for nearly 35 years, cargo had not been transported to Armenia via this route, which passes through the territory of Azerbaijan, and there had likewise been no movement in the opposite direction. In this context, today is a historic day. The development carries significant importance for the diversification of economic and logistical connections. It should also be noted that this forms part of the peace agenda approved in Washington on the 8th of August.
Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan called the development an important step in implementing the agreements reached in Washington and emphasised the need for two-way cargo movement.
The situation is dynamic and new requests are emerging. It is also necessary to assess how the reverse flow of cargo from Armenia to Russia, Kazakhstan and other countries can be organised. I am confident that, over time, the nature and progress of the situation will become clear to the public. I believe this is indeed a very significant and important development. In this regard, I would like to once again express my gratitude and reaffirm our readiness to ensure the transit of freight trucks between Turkey and Azerbaijan in both directions, from Turkey to Azerbaijan and from Azerbaijan to Turkey.
According to Russia's transport ministry, by the end of January 2026, a total of 132 wagons of Russian wheat will be delivered to Armenia via the railway routes passing through Azerbaijan and Georgia. In addition to grain, other categories of cargo are also being considered for transportation along this route.
Well, joining me now in the studio is A News' Anastasia Lavrina. Anastasia, good to see you. Recap then what we know so far about this symbolic first cargo. When did it cross into Azerbaijan and where's it headed in Armenia?
Well, it's a historic achievement and I will even name it as a peace in practice. The first shipment consists of 15 wagons carrying about more than 1,000 tons of Russian wheat, departed from Ulyanovsk region in Russia, and as it's already been mentioned, crossed Azerbaijan, then Georgia, and was delivered to Armenia just yesterday. It arrived as a station in northern Armenia late November 5th. And as it was mentioned by the representatives of railway company in Armenia, it's indeed a historic achievement. I will say what two sides negotiated in Washington on 8th of August with the participation of American leader Donald Trump, and now is being realized by two sides. And another symbolic meaning of this achievement is that in a couple of days Azerbaijan will celebrate the 5th anniversary of a victory in the 44th days patriotic war, and we can see that Azerbaijan already turned the page of war and trying to promote the peaceful development in the region. So I see some symbolic meaning in these particular achievements, implementation of the agreements reached in Washington. And just I want to quote, I mentioned it for myself, how Pashinyan's office calls the development significant in a context, I just quoted, strengthening mutual trust and promoting the peace agenda between two countries.
Yeah, it's very interesting because this is partly obviously a diplomatic breakthrough, but also partly very practical. Economy, trade. We've now got this ability for trades in goods of all different varieties to flow through. How are each of the two different governments framing this?
Well, now it's also very interesting, as it was mentioned, that these cargo flows may work in an opposite direction as well. Almost 35 years there was no any transport linkages in between, and Armenian economy was blocked. The borders with Azerbaijan and Turkey were closed, and no any cargo was able to be delivered from Kazakhstan or Russia through Azerbaijan to Armenia. So Baku definitely presents it as a practical gesture of goodwill and a sign that peace is no longer just a statement but a process in motion. Yerevan calls it as a historical milestone, strengthening that its economic importance, and will definitely help to stabilize the economy of Armenia, which we have to accept is not so much delivered in comparison to the other regional economies we can see in the South Caucasus. But both sides emphasize the cooperation and connectivity. avoiding any political disagreements which may still appear. So economy, it's now at the first stage to have a more practical approach in Yerevan and Baku. And I would like to say that international observers and the reaction in some European countries is also quite positive, because they can see that the countries are willing to see the economic progress to be achieved. That will definitely benefit not only Armenia and Azerbaijan, but Russia and some other countries in the region.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? I think everybody, many different actors, as you say, can see how they might benefit from this. Going back to the practicalities, I mean, how has it actually gone so far? You know, logistics is a complicated business. Have there been any delays, security checks, problems that you're aware of?
Before coming to this interview, I just surfed the internet trying to understand if there were some complaints about the process, but to be honest, I couldn't find any negative outcomes about the process, how it worked so far. There have not been any reports on delays, security incidents, or any logistical problems, only positive feedbacks from this. And the transit through Azerbaijan, of course, included some standard procedures like standard customs, security checks as part of normal international process, nothing specifically related to Armenia, but overall have such kind of, let's say, transport linkages is operational. And again, it's just a pilot project. This is the first time in almost 35 years when the cargo is being delivered from Russia through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. And if it works smoothly, then for the future, probably it will become one of the parts of the future Dengizur corridor, which is now on the agenda as well, or as it's also called, Trump route for international peace and prosperity. If it's operational, if there is no any delays and security problems, then indeed these links have a great potential to benefit both Europe and Asia.
Now, at A News, as you know well, we've interviewed many people, both in Baku and in Yerevan, about the developing peace process. What has been the reaction from ordinary members of the public, citizens of both countries, to this momentous event?
In this particular situation, I will say they have positive and negative aspects, because again, we had a conflict lasted over 30 years. Therefore, it's not so easy for some people to, let's say, accept that the peace can go so fast, and it will definitely benefit both societies, both nations, but still we need some more time to understand this reality on the ground. In Armenia, if we are talking about the officials, the reaction was quite positive. If it's more about the population, there's still some skepticism, some skeptical approach for the future, but we cannot, and no one can ignore that from the economic perspective, it will definitely benefit both Armenia and Azerbaijan. And if we compare two societies, for Azerbaijan, it's not something new in terms of global economic development. Azerbaijan already have a quite good transport infrastructure in connection with Georgia, Turkey, and then further to Europe. We have a good cooperation from the north and south part of transport communication between Russia and Iran, for example. So we have this global experience, and for Armenia it's something new. That's why their society is more excited. But for us in Azerbaijan, it's like, as already mentioned, peace in practice, meaning that we turn the page of the war and we are willing to move forward. Analysis describe it as not a peace agreement, but the start of the peaceful logistics. I like this term also, like the peaceful logistic that will benefit two countries. And coming back to what I already mentioned about the reaction of the international community, the position of Azerbaijan and Armenian society is also quoted in some European sources, saying that probably this is just the beginning, but when there is more practical cooperation in between, it will become as a part of a normal activity, daily activity, probably. Yeah. Now it's only Russia, but for the future, I guess you already know this, Kazakhstan is also willing to send some wheat shipment to follow within the next days. And it will be the first shipment of food-grade wheat from Kazakhstan that will be delivered through Azerbaijan to Armenia. So Russia, Kazakhstan, and maybe some more countries in the future to use this route for delivering the cargo to Armenia, then from Armenia back to Kazakhstan and Russia. So there is a great potential for the future.
And interesting the role that trade can play in cementing this peace process. Of course, trade and logistics, something that gathers its own momentum. So as you say, it's not absolutely essential that both sides always agree on everything. There'll continue to be a myriad of different views, disagreements on issues, but there's enough of an agreement to allow trade to flow. And it's really key, isn't it? The role that trade can play in securing and developing that peace.
Absolutely. This is one of the parts. Remember when two sides signed a trilateral statement in November 2020 between Russia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, there was a key point about the transport communication development in between of two countries, naming it as a Zangezur corridor. In Armenia, there were some, I would say, huge dissatisfaction because of the name, because of the so-called intervention of outside players to the domestic issues of Armenia. They were so much skeptical about the operational developments of this project. But now, since the agreement was achieved in Washington in August, in Armenia, more and more politicians are recognizing the importance of these transport linkages. Since the end of the war in 2020, it was Azerbaijan who was trying to explain to the global community and to Armenia itself that Armenian society and Armenian people will benefit from this economic development. Doesn't matter whether this cooperation is happening in the format 3+3, 5+1, or these new ways of cooperation with an active participation of Washington, United States. The main issue is to make sure that these linkages are operational. There is no any delays. The security checks is happening, but in accordance with the internal rules, domestic rules of the countries, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and some others who are involved in the process. And if we started now, 5 years after the end of the war, meaning that, again, in comparison, this period of time is quite short, that two sides agreed to move forward. Let's see how it will be developed in a couple of months, maybe, and probably we will see the opening of the borders and the operational of these linkages which were on the paper, but now they are in reality.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, about the practicalities of next steps. You know, we've had this successful first cargo. What's the plan now? Was this just a test run? Is there evaluation? Do more runs come? What happens?
Officials describe it not as a one-time shipment, but at the beginning of a regular transit operations in both countries. Already said about Kazakhstan, which is also willing to be a part of that. And at the meeting which were held between heads of the state in Kazakhstan just recently, it was also agreed that Azerbaijan to become a hub for the future logistical projects. Azerbaijan is already a hub for many transport communication links in connecting east and west, north and south, and this is a new, let's say, link which will be connecting Azerbaijan and Armenia. And it's not surprisingly that Zangezur corridor is now being discussed as a future part of Belt and Road Chinese initiative. Of course, China was a bit skeptical about this since the agreement achieved in Washington because of the participation of Donald Trump, taking into account the difficulties in the relations of Beijing and Washington. Yes. But since two leaders met just recently and Donald Trump said that Xi Jinping is a great leader, meaning that they found a consensus. The disagreements will stay, but still, when it comes to the communications and transport linkages in the region, it seems that there is a real perspectives. Also, Russia's transport ministry announced plans for up to 132 more rail cars by January 2026 by the same route. So Armenia is exploring reverse cargo flows, potentially exporting goods through Azerbaijan to Russia and Kazakhstan to make it sure that they also can send their goods through the shortest route. So for now, it's a pilot corridor under the close political supervision, but if successful, it could become a permanent Eurasian trade link.
And these are meaningful numbers as well. So yeah, very interesting indeed to follow its development. Anastasia, always lovely to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much
for coming in.
Me.
Okay, we're going to take a short break now, and then we'll be back with the top business news of the day. Do stay with us.
What is power? Has leadership truly evolved, or are the old rules of geopolitics still pulling the strings behind the scenes? Who is really powerful? And what makes people feel powerless? Our new series explores the secrets, strategies, and consequences of power.
It's often said the world never sleeps, but who's ready to wake you up with all you need to know about what is happening across the globe and in the region?
We are. Daybreak is live every morning, bringing you a complete wrap-up of the stories from overnight and all the news already happening in the world.
The biggest global headlines, the key regional developments, the must-read stories shaping the day.
We show them, we discuss them, we guide you through their meaning. We give you the news and a first look at the key headlines.
I'm Nadia Jani.
And I'm Lou Brown.
Join us, it's Daybreak here at A News.
Welcome back to Prime Time now. Andy Mioch is here with the very latest business news stories of the day. Andy, over to you.
Thank you so much. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. We've got stories on chips, free trade, payouts, autos, and aviation. So, without further ado, China says it's ready to explore new trade and investment deals with the European Union. Beijing's Commerce Ministry says both sides have huge space for cooperation, as the bloc urges China to ease curbs on chips and rare earths, key to Europe's car and tech sectors.
China's Commerce Ministry said on Thursday the country is willing to explore the possibility of various trade and investment agreements with the European Union. Commerce Ministry spokesperson He Yadong told a press conference that the two sides share extensive common interests and huge space for cooperation. The comment followed remarks by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Tuesday, who told his Estonian counterpart Margus Tsahkna in Beijing that China was ready to negotiate and sign a free trade agreement with the bloc. It comes amid urgent efforts by the EU to persuade China to ease up on restrictions on the supply of chips and rare earths, vital for car and other industries, something already achieved by the US.
But as Beijing talks partnership, its trade tensions are already hitting Europe's chip supply. Chipmaker Nexperia says it's working to end a governance crisis after the Netherlands seized control of the company. China then blocked exports, disrupting supplies to global car makers.
Chip company Nexperia expects to resolve a crisis over control of the company. But it also warned customers Thursday it couldn't guarantee products made in China after October 13th were authentic or meet quality standards. The statement further said facilities in other countries are operating as normal. The Dutch government seized control of Nexperia in late September, citing lapses in governance. Chinese authorities then blocked exports of its products just days later from October 4th. That led to a shortage of Nexperia chips widely used by car makers. Nexperia welcomed news that it won't be subject to US export restrictions for 1 year under a US-China agreement. Beijing has also said it will allow exports on a case-by-case basis. Nexperia's Chinese parent firm Wingtech is subject to US restrictions, while its founder was suspended from his role as Nexperia CEO by a Dutch court in October.
Semiconductors aren't the only front in the tech rivalry. Another US giant is expanding its reach deep into the Indo-Pacific. Google is reportedly planning a major AI data center on Australia's remote Christmas Island after a defense cloud deal earlier this year.
Google plans to build a large artificial intelligence data centre on Australia's remote Indian Ocean outpost of Christmas Island, after signing a cloud deal with the Department of Defence earlier this year, according to documents reviewed by Reuters and interviews with officials. Plans for the data centre on the tiny island located 350 kilometres south of Indonesia have not previously been reported, and many details, including its projected size, cost and potential uses, remain secret. However, military experts say such a facility would be a valuable asset on the island, which is increasingly seen by defence officials as a critical front line in monitoring Chinese submarine and other naval activity in the Indian Ocean. Google is in advanced talks to lease land near the island's airport to construct the data hub, including a deal with a local mining company to secure its energy needs. Christmas Island Shire officials told Reuters and council meeting records show.
While Google builds out its AI network, another tech titan faces a defining vote and a record payout. Tesla shareholders are voting on Elon Musk's $878 billion pay package, the largest in corporate history. The outcome will show confidence in his push to make Tesla an AI and robotics leader, or signal investor fatigue.
Tesla shareholders are set to decide whether to pay CEO Elon Musk up to $878 billion, the richest executive pay in history by a long shot. But the high-profile vote is only one of several proposals that could reshape the electric vehicle maker's future, from the board's power to whether Tesla should invest in Musk's artificial intelligence firm xAI. The results of the pay vote are expected during the annual general meeting on Thursday afternoon at the company's factory in Austin, Texas. Passage of the payday would be a vote of confidence in Musk's leadership and his vision of transforming the company into an AI and robotics juggernaut. A rejection could create turmoil.
Elsewhere in autos, Japan's Nissan is showing signs of recovery. The company posted its best quarterly profit in over a year, helped by strong North American sales and cost cuts. But tariffs and supply chain risks, including chip shortages from Nexperia, still cloud its outlook.
Nissan Motor swung back to an operating profit in the second quarter, reporting its best quarterly result in more than a year on Thursday, thanks to its efforts to reduce fixed costs under a turnaround plan and stronger sales in North America. Nissan booked 51.5 billion yen in operating profit for the July to September quarter, up 61% from 31.9 billion yen a year earlier. CEO Ivan Espinosa said North American sales performed strongly in the second quarter, driven by a more focused marketing effort for regionally produced models, simplified dealer programs, and a greater emphasis on retail business over fleet sales. In Japan, retail sales slid 16.5% in the first half as customers worried over the company's financial situation. The result comes as the automaker presses ahead with a sweeping turnaround plan that includes reducing its global manufacturing plants to 10 sites from 17 and laying off 15% of its workforce. Nissan maintained a forecast released last week for a 275 billion yen annual operating loss in the year through March 2026 due to the hit from US tariffs and supply chain risks, including from problems with the supply of Nexperia chips.
In aviation, one Gulf carrier is offloading its stake in a Hong Kong heavyweight. Qatar Airways has sold its entire 9.7% stake in Cathay Pacific for nearly $900 million, ending an 8-year investment.
State-owned Qatar Airways has decided to sell its entire stake in Cathay Pacific Airways for about $897 million, marking its complete exit from Hong Kong's flagship airline after 8 years. Cathay said late on Wednesday that the Doha-based carrier had approached it about selling its entire 9.7% stake, and it would repurchase the shareholding through a buyback at $1.39 per share, roughly a 4% discount to its last closing share price. The Gulf carrier had bought the stake in November 2017, making it the third largest shareholder in Cathay after Swire Pacific and Air China. Cathay is paying roughly a 35% premium over the price Qatar Airways originally paid for the stake to buy it back. The Hong Kong carrier said it would fund the deal through internal resources and existing credit lines. Cathay and Qatar Airways said they would continue their partnership through the One World Alliance.
Meanwhile, Air France KLM posted $1.4 billion in quarterly profit, slightly above last year but below forecasts. The group says lower fuel costs and strong premium travel helped offset currency losses and rising expenses.
Air France KLM reported solid third-quarter results Thursday, despite rising costs. The airline also confirmed its outlook for this year, even though it has seen higher expenses and costly challenges for KLM. The group reported an operating profit of $1.4 billion, just below analyst forecasts, but slightly higher than last year. CEO Ben Smith said the carrier showed its resilience in a challenging environment during the period. The group was particularly helped by lower fuel costs and solid bookings in its more luxurious premium cabins.
And that is the wrap on business for today. Handing it back over to you, Guy.
A lot going on in the skies, Andy. Very interesting indeed. Very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, coming up, we'll be looking at the latest developments taking place in Iran and discussing it with our Iranian correspondent here in the studio. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Partnership with Azerbaijan will allow Israel also to enjoy some of the benefits.
What makes Azerbaijan a uniquely strategic partner for Israel?
Peace process with Armenia, which will bring more and more stability to both countries.
One of the key elements of that Donald Trump's Gaza ceasefire agreement is delivery of the humanitarian aid to Gaza.
More and more humanitarian aid entering Gaza from various checkpoints. We cannot allow a terrorist organization to sit on our borders.
Welcome back to Primetime. Now, US President Donald Trump is turning up the pressure on Nigeria, warning he could deploy American troops, claiming violence against Christians must be stopped. Abuja has pushed back firmly, insisting its sovereignty and territorial integrity are not up for debate.
Fast and vicious action. Those were the words that US President Donald Trump used to describe possible American military intervention in Nigeria if the country does not halt what he claims is the killing of Christians. Last week, Trump returned Nigeria to a list of countries the United States accuses of violating religious freedom. He has since threatened to cut all aid unless decisive action is taken.
If the Nigerian government continues to allow the killing of Christians, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria. We're going to do things to Nigeria that Nigeria is not going to be happy about and may very well go into that now disgraced country, guns a-blazing, to completely wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible, horrible atrocities.
Nigeria's government has rejected the US designation of the country as one of particular concern, saying the move is based on misinformation and faulty data.
The government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is well apprised of the level of anxiety created by the designation of our country as a country of particular concern or CPC by the US government, and the threats of military action by the President of the United States, following a wrong perception and misrepresentation of the security challenges in our country.
Nigeria says it acknowledges that it faces terrorism, but denies the persecution of Christians. The presidency has previously said it would welcome US assistance in fighting Islamist insurgents, provided the country's territorial integrity is respected. Insurgent groups such as Boko Haram and the Islamic State West Africa province have killed thousands over more than 15 years. Home to more than 200 ethnic groups practicing Christianity, Islam and traditional faiths, Nigeria has a long history of coexistence, but has also experienced periodic violence, often driven by ethnic tensions and competition for scarce resources.
OK, joining me now from the UK is John Kavalik, Senior Editor of Issue Insight. John, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, we hear a lot of these threats, don't we, from President Trump, in increasingly elaborate terms. I'm going to do things you're not going to like. Just you wait. This is going to be bad, etc., etc. Is this political theatre? Is it playing to his base? Or is there some policy, some strategy actually behind it?
It's a mixture of all three. The biggest problem for Nigeria doesn't necessarily come directly from what President Trump threatens to do. It's because of President Trump's bullying and his use of the bully pulpit and his willingness to threaten other countries if they don't go along with him, is that this focus on Nigeria metastasizes, and he starts saying to the European Union, the 27 members of the European Union, you better go along with us with respect to Nigeria. As to the 32 members of NATO, some are cross with the EU, you better support us with respect to Nigeria. And then he looks at other countries in the region. So that's what Nigeria has to worry about, is that, yes, President Trump, he has the ability to deliver on everything he says, but he doesn't always do so. But it's what kind of pressure does he then try to exert on other countries to go along? And then lastly, I would say and it's unpleasant to say it, but Nigeria is on the African continent. Nigeria is led by blacks, Africans. President Trump, as we know from the words out of his own mouth during his first term, he doesn't look at countries favorably. He called them, I'm allowed, shithole countries. And he doesn't have many black people around him to give him varying perspectives. He's basically a white man's guy.
Very, very strong language indeed there. Apologies to any viewers that were offended by that, but it was a direct quote, and it is indicative of the sort of language that this president does use. Some would argue to good effect. What is the nature of the threat, of the leverage then, John? Is it predominantly the withdrawal of aid? Is it about disruption, influence on other regional actors? What are the key levers that the president may pull or might threaten to pull?
Ironically, you look at the alphabet and it's words that begin with S and T: sanctions and tariffs. Those are his favorite tools to use. And Nigeria is a very large country. Economically, it's a powerhouse on the African continent. Oil, energy is a big revenue earner. And President Trump could start going after Nigeria first with export controls. So products that have any U.S. content could be subject to licensing restrictions through United States Department of Treasury, United States Department of Commerce. He could restrict Nigeria's access to banking. He could put pressure on the SWIFT members that coordinate international banking. Russia was thrown out of SWIFT, for example, after the invasion of Ukraine. He's got a lot of tools he could use, and of course, sanctioning Nigerian leadership. Many of those leaders would probably smartly have already moved their assets out of the United States so they wouldn't be subject to sanctions. But again, President Trump could go to the European Union, go to Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, and say, hey, we want you to say, here's the list. You freeze the assets of these people as well.
It's very interesting as well. One of the other very strong, controversial things, of course, he's done is brought religion into the heart of this conversation. The country of Nigeria famously is split geographically. Tell us about the situation, how it relates to religious differences in the country, and your thoughts, please, John, on this sort of religious element that the president has brought into the discussion.
It's so interesting. Nigeria as a country is almost split between Christians and Muslims, but it's had last almost 20 years Boko Haram, which over time became Boko Haram of different organizations, but they also, as they somewhat migrated toward the ideology of the Islamic State, and that they were sort of an equal opportunity killer. Kill Christians, kidnap people, kill Muslims, burn down churches, burn down mosques. They were, it was basically the left and the right. And so for them, there was something to dislike about almost everyone. You add to that the endemic corruption that successive Nigerian governments have been guilty of. And when you see the former presidents of Nigeria, they don't leave with a pension of six figures. They leave with fortunes, billions and billions of dollars. And where does a lot of that money end up? In banks within European Union member countries. So it's sort of ripe for a lot of people that feel disenfranchised, that feel that with all the oil revenues, they shouldn't be poor, but they are. And then you have President Trump with the religious. And what's ironic here is this is a guy that doesn't go to church. He stays away from going to church, but he will, when it's full, go as he did his first term after January 6th, walk across the park at the White House and famously stood in front of a church holding a Bible upside down. So he will embrace religion, thinks it's going to be useful to him, and then it's the people around him. Some of his focus on it come. He party, a Halloween party, or some other lobster serving event at Mar-a-Lago, his club, and people come up to him. And there are a lot of very conservative religious people that are members or that grab him. President, did you hear that the in Nigeria are killing white Christians, even though they're black Christians? But that's how it'll be framed. And then you have some of these religious groups and you have members of the U.S. House and Senate. One from West Virginia is introducing a resolution condemning what Nigeria is doing. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, a Republican, wants a resolution condemning. And they know that President Trump will look to curry favor on any particular day with something that's a good distraction. And so he's rallying everyone to show that he cares about our beautiful, cherished Christians. And this is a man that, probably couldn't quote a passage of the Bible.
Well, John, he's famously also the president been critical of previous presidents that have taken a more interventionist approach abroad. But he has now, there is obviously the situation in Venezuela. There's this conversation that's taking place. He's been seemingly on a world tour, as he would describe it, stopping wars all over the world. Just in terms of Africa specifically, though, do you think there's any chance this could lead to further interventions across that continent?
It's possible. We militarily, we have footprint there. We have an African command. So, are the resources there to either bring in and off of sort of a la Venezuela, off of the coasts and with using an aircraft carrier as a delivery platform, using cruise missiles. We can do a lot of damage and not have to have boots on the ground. But we can also have boots on the ground. And generally the military will say some boots, whether in the form of actual Department of Defense /war, Central Intelligence Agency assets that are already in country. And, so they will say, yes, Mr. President, we can surgically go after these people. But President Trump is always about the optics, the performance, the performative aspects of things. And so we start dropping bombs or we insert special forces troops to go after folks. It's hard to end this. It's hard for him to come out of this by saying, we've killed all the Boko Haram. We've killed all the people who don't like Christians. How can you possibly do that? So there is a delivery mechanism. The bigger problem is that, we now have President Trump, famously, having issues with the president or with South Africa when President Ramaphosa was in the Oval Office. He said he's not going to the G20. And now he says that South Africa shouldn't be in the G20. And a little while ago, he would say, well, maybe Russia and China could be invited as observers to the G20. All three of them are in the G20 based on the size of their economy. So there's a lot of misinformation that inhabits President Trump's brain because he's focused on the headline. He's not focused on the byline.
And John, obviously, stating the obvious here, but Africa is a huge and diverse continent. Not all countries will have anything like a similar view of the US and Mr. Trump in particular. But if you had to sort of look at a heat map of President Trump's popularity, if you like, across the continent, where does he have support? Where is he popular? Where could he possibly build some alliances, do you think?
Where he should be able to build alliances is certainly East Africa, led by Kenya, Southern Africa, led by South Africa, some of the Western countries that historically have relationships with the United States. Unfortunately, some with with slave trade, whether you're looking at Ghana and others. Northern Africa, of course, you have all the issues relating to Morocco and Libya and Tunisia and Algeria and that. There should be opportunities for us. And in previous administrations, you go back to Ronald Reagan and first Bush, second Bush, Clinton, Obama, there were initiatives that provided funding, that provided economic opportunities, that provided finance guarantees so U.S. companies could go in. And there had been some successes with that. But President Trump, on the one hand, he will say, I want to be the exporter in chief, and I want everyone to buy our products. And if you don't buy our products, I'm going to sanction you. And in the case of the African continent, many of those countries don't export products to the United States. They just don't make things that might be exportable. And so for President Trump to then say, well, we're going to tariff you, we're going to sanction you in that. And it makes it very hard for these people to raise their hand and go, Donald, we're with you. Sort of like, President Milei of Argentina. The Trump administration is not running to guarantee a backstop of $20 to $40 billion to any country on the African continent. Again, I go back to what's the main reason? African continent, Black. He doesn't have a lot of history with Blacks, other than saying they love me and they voted for me, and he just looks at the continent as unpleasant and no need to nurture it. And if they want to deal with us, fine. But he just looks at them as pretty undesirable.
It's very interesting that, though, John, if you think about the raw materials that are so critical that many African countries can provide, particularly with today's advanced technologies. You look at the huge increases in population in countries like Nigeria, young, growing middle class, and also the opportunity, typically in Mr. Trump's mind, the opportunity to possibly make life difficult for Monsieur Macron and the Europeans, bringing up the legacy of colonialism. But that's just not on his agenda as far as you can see.
Now, if there's a way to make life for President Emmanuel Macron of France difficult, that's something that he'll look at like a child with asking for a candy bar. He's going to be all over that if any opportunity comes along for him to make a problem because of the legacy issues, whether it's France, whether it's Belgium, to a lesser extent the UK. But again, you're absolutely right. The African continent, very young population, very tech savvy. Cell phone usage is very, very high per capita in almost all these countries. They have raw materials. But he sort of looks at the map, and if there's a white country that can do it, so be it. If the African countries want to buy stuff, that's fine. But generally, even in the case of China with rare earths, China does have the vast majority on a percentage basis, of rare earth metals that are important today. But what we've seen during the last years is two things. First, while they may have a lot, there's always someone who also has some, maybe less, but it's available from someone else. And the other thing that happens is that what the 3 or 4 raw materials, metals, ores that are today valuable in technology, a year or two from now, there may be something else that replaces them. So those countries don't necessarily have an advantage tomorrow that they're having today. And again, President Trump just looks at all this and says, you got cash, I'll talk to you. But he just looks at the continent of Africa as a place that's corrupt, disorganized, not not civilized. And we saw his meeting with President Ramaphosa of South Africa. I mean, this should be our, basically with Kenya, our closest ally on the continent, where it's a black-led government. And he's showing him pictures claiming to be white, genocide on whites that weren't even taken at the time that he said they were taken and where they were taken.
And that was quite that was quite a performance. I think our viewers will remember that. Just a question on situations like that. When these ambushes occur in the Oval Office, do the teams of the people coming in not anticipate that these things are going to happen? To what extent is the almost like a sort of performance surprised on people? Because I think a lot of our viewers would be surprised that there's no inkling that these sorts of things are going to happen as televisions are wheeled in behind diplomats.
Yeah, having been part of these briefing teams, I can share with you that every team that does the advance team for a head of state, head of government visit to the Oval Office, President Trump, President Biden, President Obama, you work your way back. It generally involves weeks to months of planning, and you do model for what is that Oval Office spray, which is the first several minutes where they meet, they sit in the Oval Office, the media's brought in, take some pictures, then the media asks some questions. And generally, that's, it's pretty well framed out because both governments know what the media are going to ask, so they're prepared. They're prepared for that. And then as far as the conversations with each other, that's generally scripted pretty much too. As you've seen, most heads of state and heads of government come in with little note cards because they sort of know, what's likely to come up in the friendly chat type. But President Trump, while that does somewhat happen, he has the official script and the official guidance, and then he has what he wants to do and what he deems to be Trumpian and a surprise. So for the president of South Africa, he knew going in that there were going to be discussions with respect to these issues of, quote, white genocide and land seizures and that. So, he and his team knew that. But what they didn't know is that there was going to be a video monitor in the room, and President Trump was going to say, as a famous sports announcer does, let's go to the videotape. Now, so there's always this unknown and the fear of unknown. But everyone watched no one wants to be Zelensky'd, which has become a verb now. That's President Zelensky of Ukraine when he had that infamous meeting with President Trump that just went horribly wrong. And since that time, you've seen the leaders go. Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, was probably the best. What does he do? He brings a letter from King Charles inviting President Trump on a rare second state visit. And so for President Trump, it's political orgasm time. He is just so excited. And so they've sort of learned how to deal with him. Mr. Rutte, the General Secretary of NATO, has done it. Stubb, the President of Finland. But we also see President Ramaphosa, a black man, and he really got beaten up.
Yeah, it's very interesting indeed. I often wonder whether, to some degree, actually, it's a case of people knowing perhaps what's coming, but actually the US administration saying, but I'm afraid there's nothing you can do to stop it.
There is some of that. And, President Ramaphosa, first, President Trump, says he's not going to the G20. And he said Vice President Vance is going to go. Then he says that, no one may go. And then it's South Africa shouldn't be a member of the G20. And then there's a the head of state suggested, well, maybe President Putin and President Trump could get together at the G20. And President Trump says, I'm not going. President Putin sending his, I think, a deputy chief, or I think Sergei Lavrov might go, the foreign minister. It's just totally gone off the rails. And if you're a black person in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Kenya, unfortunately, you can't help but look at the totality of the personality and the decision-making of President Trump and say, this guy is a racist, he's prejudiced, he might as well be wearing a Ku Klux Klan white hat. He doesn't like us, he doesn't respect us, he doesn't want anything to do with us, and we're just gonna have to figure out how to deal with that for the next 3.5 years, because President Ramaphosa sort of half-jokingly said, I wish I had a plane to give you. And he was referencing Qatar had given President Trump, or the U.S., not sure yet, a 747-800 to be used as a third Air Force One, a $400 or so million gift. And President Trump said, yeah, I wish you did. It's just astonishing. And if you're a citizen of any of these countries on the African continent, you just have to be so disappointed, because you remember 8 years ago, we had elected the first black president, Barack Obama. And look at where we are now, so soon after that.
Well, John, as always with these situations, I know that many, many people who support President Trump would disagree with your analysis, but we thank you for such an evocative and elegant analysis, as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from the UK.
Thank you.
Okay, now President Trump has also been looking to influence and rivalry with Beijing and Moscow. Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm J-Dad. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabana.
I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port Ainugu.
What is power? Has leadership truly evolved, or are the old rules of geopolitics still pulling the strings behind the scenes? who is really powerful? And what makes people feel powerless? Our new series explores the secrets, strategies, and consequences of power.
It's often said the world never sleeps, but who's ready to wake you up with all you need to know about what is happening across the globe and in the region?
We are. Daybreak is live every morning, bringing you a complete wrap-up of the stories from overnight, all the news already happening in the world.
The biggest global headlines, the key regional developments, the must-read stories shaping the day.
We show them, we discuss them, we guide you through their meaning. We give you the news and a first look at the key headlines.
I'm Nadia Johnny.
And I'm Lou Brown.
Join us, it's Daybreak here at A News.
Welcome back to Prime Time. Now the US is making its move in Central Asia, hosting the C5+1 summit and lining up President Trump's meeting with regional leaders in Washington. Trade, minerals and security top the agenda as Washington looks to counter Beijing's reach and Moscow's growing sway across the heart of Eurasia.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio hosted the foreign ministers of Central Asian states on Wednesday as the C5+1 summit kicks off with meetings scheduled between Central Asian heads of state and President Trump throughout the week. President of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, arrived in Washington, D.C., where he is expected to sign hundreds of billions of dollars worth of deals, including crypto and critical mineral mining with American companies. Kazakhstan supplies over 45% of the world's uranium, and enhancing its partnership with Washington could help the U.S. secure energy resilience and help Kazakhstan secure major American investments. The summit in Washington will address mineral processing, trade routes, strategic partnerships, and defense ties amid Washington's growing concerns of China's dominance of rare earth mineral exports.
After meeting the foreign ministers of 5 Central Asian countries, Secretary of State Marco Rubio highlighted the importance of strengthening ties ahead of talks with President Trump.
First, I do want to thank Ambassador Gore and Deputy Secretary Landau for the trip they took last week. It was important. They spent a substantial amount of time, and I know they look forward to going back to the other countries they were not able to visit. I personally intend to visit in the coming year as well, and all 5. So I know it'll probably be a week-long or longer trip, so we got to work on that and make that happen together. And I think it's an exciting opportunity and a new era in our relationship in Central Asia, which I think it's been about 10 years since there was a gathering of this kind. So it's been over a decade.
On Thursday, President Trump will meet the leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan at the White House. The discussions are expected to focus on mineral resources, trade routes, strategic partnerships, and defense cooperation as the US seeks to strengthen ties with the resource-rich region. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the West has intensified engagement with Central Asia, challenging Moscow's traditional influence. At the same time, China continues to play a major role in regional trade and investment, particularly in infrastructure and rare earth minerals.
Let's head over now to Washington, D.C. and get the very latest from our correspondent, Nick Harper.
Well, Guy, this really comes down to 2 things, minerals and influence. 2 things that the US wants from the region but doesn't really have at this stage. We know that Donald Trump has been on this tremendous campaign to try and do deals with individual countries to give Washington access to critical minerals, to rare earths in various nations around the world. And part of that is to try and reduce the dominance and the reliance that the US has on China for rare earths, but also try and decrease some of the imports that it's currently getting from Russia. So, for example, Central Asia, two countries in particular account for about half of all the world's uranium production. Uranium, of course, needed for nuclear energy here in the United States, but around the world. And the US is trying to bolster its supply of uranium. It currently gets about 20% from Russia. It would love to reduce that figure. So that's why we're seeing this first ever summit between the US and these 5 Central Asian countries being held at the White House. That hasn't happened before, even though this partnership got set up back in 2015, a decade ago, the C5+1 partnership, really to try and increase US engagement in the region. So we'll be hearing probably things along the lines of critical mineral cooperation, but also looking to boost security ties, other economic possibilities. In the past few weeks, we know that there have been deals, in particular between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and the United States, both those countries buying US-made planes and trains. The US president will undoubtedly be trying to push other deals that can be done to strengthen ties between the two areas of the world. But what we've also seen is the US really trying to counter the dominance that both Russia and China has with these 5 countries. There have been historical ties, of course, economic ties between these Central Asian countries, but also in recent years, tremendous investment from China in the likes of infrastructure deals, mineral deals. We know that President Putin has visited these countries and the region about 77 times. President Xi Jinping of China about 15 times. Obviously, Donald Trump has not yet, so there could be the possibility of a trip at some point in the future. But it will be that difficult balancing act because these countries enjoy their relationships with Russia and China. It's important for their economies and their stability. So if the US president is presenting this as an us versus them type situation, then there are unlikely to be much in the way of deals or cooperations. And I think there will need to be that balancing act, the US acknowledging that it wants to increase ties with these countries, but knowing that those countries will also be keeping their ties with Russia and China.
Okay, joining me now to discuss this is Mr. Janat Mominkulov, a senior lecturer at the Eurasian National University in Astana, Kazakhstan. Thank you very much for joining us on Prime Time. How significant is this then? Central Asian leaders in the White House. What message does this send to the region, but also to the wider world?
Thank you for having me. I think this meeting with Central Asian leaders at the White House is far more than symbolic. It's a strategic signal. For the first time, Washington is treating the region as a region of direct strategic interest, not just peripheral zone between China and Russia. So the summit focused on tangible cooperation, data, minerals, contracts. The US message is clear. Central Asia matters for the global energy, logistics, technology security. It's a shift from declarative diplomacy to practical engagement.
And you mentioned a number of factors there. One of those factors that's caught a lot of attention is the critical minerals that you mentioned. Just to take us through, what are these critical minerals, and specifically, what do you think might be on the table in terms of any potential deal making that could take place?
I think at the heart of this renewed engagement is the race for critical minerals between US and China. So the tungsten, uranium, and rare earth are central. So tungsten, essential for defense and AI technologies, is already on the table. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan together hold strategic resources, reserves for the America. And I think U.S. wants access to these resources in order to reduce dependence on China. So this is not just a diplomacy, it's economic geopolitics, aligning energy, security, supply chains, and industrial strategy. So for Washington, securing reliable partners in Eurasia is a long-term investment in sovereignty.
And of course, on the other side, geographically, you have two enormous actors who will be watching this very closely, China and Russia. Give us your sense of how you believe they see this development, and just how carefully do those Central Asian leaders need to play this? Because, of course, nobody would want to make a clumsy diplomatic move.
Yes, sure. Moscow views this outreach as a direct intrusion into its historical sphere of influence, but with limited tools to resist amid economic and military fatigue. So Beijing, meanwhile, takes a more pragmatic stance, I think, seeing this not as a threat, but as a part for four-way balance: Central Asia, Russia, China, and the United States. In practice, China still dominates trade and infrastructure in Central Asia, but it accepts that regional diversification is inevitable. For Beijing, the US presence may even help stabilize the geopolitical triangle, so long as it doesn't evolve into a containment strategy.
It's very interesting there that actually you paint this picture that because China are taking a more pragmatic approach, they can see how they may benefit from this situation. That actually Russia, in a sense, is too isolated to really do much about its concern.
Yes, I think in this situation, China's attitude is difficult from Russia. So Russia, little things to do. And for Central Asian states, I think engagement with Washington in this case is not ideological, but strategic. They seek to balance their partnerships, lessen dependence on China, and hedge against northern pressure. So our countries are cautious. We welcome investment, but avoid antagonizing Moscow. So our diplomacy today is about managing sovereignty through diversification, maintaining balance in a world of shifting power centers.
And what are those outcomes? You mentioned a number of areas. I think many people can see the huge potential of the opportunity. But are we expecting to see trade deals, investment pledges, strategic partnerships emerge from this White House meeting?
So I think beyond diplomacy, we can expect practical outcomes, new trade and investment agreements. So we know that already there were signed a memorandum on critical minerals and commitment to infrastructure and renewable energy and security and AI cooperation. So more importantly, this format evolving into a permanent strategic platform, moving from diplomacy to trade, education, innovation. So I think there will be concrete outcomes, especially on critical minerals, energy, infrastructure, as well as steps towards strategic technology partnerships.
Okay, very interesting indeed. Mr. Mominkulov, we thank you very much indeed for joining us from Astana and for your analysis. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll be delving into the world of top trending videos in our look at the latest social media news. Do stay with us.
Partnership with Azerbaijan will allow Israel also to enjoy some of the benefits.
What makes Azerbaijan a uniquely strategic partner for Israel?
Peace process with Armenia, which will bring more and more stability to both countries.
One of the key elements of that Donald Trump's Gaza ceasefire agreement is delivery of the humanitarian aid to Gaza.
More and more humanitarian aid entering Gaza from various checkpoints. We cannot allow a terrorist organization to sit on our borders.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. Welcome back to Prime Time. Now, Guli Garadagli is here for a look at your top trending social media videos. Guli, what's on the agenda today?
Plenty happening online today, from a plane crash update to Trump's latest comments and even a stunning supermoon lighting of the night. Let's get into it. Kicking things off with a story from Kentucky, we're seeing new angles from the UPS plane crash in Louisville that happened on Tuesday. The black boxes have been found, so now it's all about trying to piece together what went wrong. All right, from that to politics, and yep, President Trump is stirring things up again. After New York elected Zohran Mamdani as mayor, President Trump had strong words, calling the new mayor a communist and criticizing Democrats' leadership in the city.
If you want to see what congressional Democrats wish to do to America, just look at the result of yesterday's election in New York, where their party installed a communist as the mayor of the largest city in the nation. Remember, I've said we will never have a socialist elected to any post in our country. I used to say that, and I was right. We skipped socialist and we put in a communist instead. That didn't work out too well.
And speaking of things heating up, over in Washington, the government shutdown is starting to hit travelers hard. So if you've got travel plans in the US, brace yourself. The record-breaking government shutdown might ground flights at some of the country's busiest airports.
10% of flights at 40 major American airports could be cut from Friday if the US government shutdown continues. That's according to US Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy and the FAA Administrator Brian Bedford. More than 2,100 flights were delayed on Wednesday. It's after the shutdown entered its 36th day on Wednesday, making it the longest in American history. The Transportation Secretary says the reductions are aimed at easing pressure on overworked air traffic controllers.
There'll be frustration. We are working with the airlines. They're going to work with passengers. But in the end, our sole role is to make sure that we keep this airspace as safe as possible. The administrator is going to talk about all of the tools we're going to deploy.
The cuts are expected to impact the nation's busiest airports, including New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Atlanta, Los Angeles and Dallas, potentially cancelling up to 1,800 flights and could affect more than 268,000 airline seats. International flights will initially be exempt.
But we do recognize that the controllers have been working fastidiously for the last 5 weeks with this huge burden over their head of lack of compensation. And we are starting to see some evidence that that fatigue is building in the system in ways that we feel we need to work towards relieving some of that pressure.
President Donald Trump said the shutdown is affecting the economy and GOP political standing. Speaking to Republican senators, he pushed for ending the filibuster to speed up legislation.
But countless public servants are now not being paid, and the air traffic control system is under increasing strain. We must get the government back open soon, and really immediately. We have to get it up. We have the hottest economy we've ever had, and it's affecting the stock market now a little bit.
Since the 1st of October, hundreds of thousands of federal workers have gone without pay, and essential services nationwide have been disrupted, putting millions of Americans at risk of losing health and food assistance.
Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, totally different kind of chaos, this time in Paris. So Shein just opened its first store in Paris, and it's chaos. Huge lines outside, but also a lot of backlash from politicians and local brands.
Dozens of shoppers lined up outside the 19th century BHV department store in Paris's Marais district before the opening of the online fast fashion retailer Shein's first ever permanent shop on Wednesday. Amid fierce criticism of its low-cost business model, Shein's store has caused an uproar from lawmakers across party lines and politicians including Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, as well as retailers who say that Shein's business model has an unfair advantage and has eroded French high streets. French authorities had already threatened a ban of the platform on Monday over childlike sex dolls found on its site by France's consumer watchdog. A number of French clothing retailers have decided to close their outlets at the BHV in response to the arrival of the Chinese brand. Other Shein outlets will open later in Galeries Lafayette department stores in 5 regional cities.
All right, from fashion drama to football drama, and this one's right here at home. Chelsea expected an easy win, but Karabakh had other plans, a stunning 2-2 draw. The atmosphere in Baku was electric.
Well, there we have it. After a nail-biting game, Karabakh have achieved a 2-2 draw against Chelsea, and the atmosphere in Baku, well, we have... Did anyone expect that Karabakh, who haven't qualified for the Champions League since 2017, would be on par with an English Premier League side? Chelsea expected the easy win here, and Karabakh did not give it to them. Now, Chelsea opened the match with a goal in the 16th minute, but that simply spurred Karabakh on to dominate the rest of the second half.
And from football to rocket launches, SpaceX just pulled off another smooth liftoff. They did it again. A fresh batch of Starlink satellites is now in orbit after Wednesday's Falcon 9 launch from Florida, with the booster nailing its return landing.
3, 2, 1. Engines full power and liftoff. Go SpaceX, go Starlink.
Vehicles pitching downrange.
M1D chamber pressure is nominal. Stage separation confirmed. And back startup.
Landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
Closer to home, there's been a small but meaningful step towards peace and cooperation. Azerbaijan's decision to allow wheat shipments to Armenia signals a new phase of cooperation and trust in their peace talks.
Orhan, how significant is this wheat shipment in the broader context of Azerbaijan-Armenia relations?
On 21st of October in this year, Baku officially lifted all cargo transit restrictions to Armenia. That opened the door for wheat and other goods to move the rail across Azerbaijan. But it's a part of the technical political messaging from the both sides. It's like it's not about the grain at itself. It's saying that about the transit opening the seats on the top of the bigger peace track. If talks stall or border incidents spikes tension, grain becomes the first thing to slow or stop. So it's like we started our peace track, the opening the communications with the symbolically with bread, because the wheat is necessary for the nations, for the people, for human beings, and lifting this transit blockade, it means that we are on the right path, and this opens the new reconciliation part in our peace track. So it's a trust building issue more than economic or the communication process.
And before we wrap up, something that had everyone looking up last night. The year's brightest supermoon rose over Latin America, the Beaver Moon in Taurus, shining closer to Earth and set to bring a sense of calm and balance.
This moon, this supermoon, which is the last one, comes to us in a sign, which is Taurus. Taurus gives us grounding, it gives us security, and it gives us that energy so that we can materialize what we have been wanting and materializing throughout the other lunar phases and throughout the year.
We follow it all the time. We look at the lunar calendar and see what day and time the full moon comes out. And depending on where we are, we try to follow it. And sometimes we even coordinate an outing, a walk or a vacation, right on the date of the full moon.
Thanks for watching the social media segment. Don't forget to check our website at anews.tv. And of course, don't forget to check us out on all of the social media platforms. Back to you, Guy.
Gilly, amazing pictures. I'll let you and the viewers into a little secret. I could hear in my ear, wow, being shouted as those pictures came out. Incredible pictures of the lunar eclipse. Incredible stuff. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, now let's take a look at other major stories from around the world. Europe is walking a line between trade, security and climate priorities.
In Belgium, and a climate deal hashed out just ahead of COP30 in Brazil, which gets underway today.
First, the EU and China announced a new special channel designed to fast-track export licenses for rare earth materials essential for wind turbines and high-tech manufacturing for civilian and military use. After months of concern over China's tighter export controls, Brussels secured this mechanism to prioritize European applications and expedite supply chain access. EU Trade Commissioner Maruš Šefčovič says about 2,000 applications have been submitted by European firms, with just over half approved so far. He also says he discussed the issue directly with China's commerce minister and emphasized that poorly managed export procedures could have, quote, a very negative impact on production and manufacturing in the EU. Firms are eager to see which ones get priority status and whether this signals a deeper strategic shift in Europe's industrial policy posture toward China. Europe is keen to move from a vulnerable supply chain relying heavily on China to more strategic autonomy by diversifying in and outside Europe. This, as China clearly dominates rare earth mining and processing. There's also growing alarm in Belgium after its busiest airport in Brussels, plus Liège, were forced to shut down this week due to drone sightings. Flight diversions, delays, and disruptions raised fresh concern over civilian air traffic security. Some experts say that at least one of the recently sighted drones appeared to be a non-civilian type, or more bluntly, a military type of drone. The Interior Minister says Belgium will not allow its airports to be disrupted by uncontrolled drone flights and that it requires, quote, a coordinated national response. The Belgian Security Council is holding an emergency meeting today, but Defense Minister Theo Franken has already said the incidents appear to be coordinated to create disruption and, quote, are in line with the hybrid techniques seen in other countries. In recent months, drones repeatedly disrupted air traffic across Europe, prompting temporary shutdowns at several airports. Some European officials suspect the incidents may be linked to Russia, an allegation Moscow firmly denies. And finally, today, an EU delegation is in Belém, Brazil for COP30. Just ahead of the climate summit, during an overnight marathon debate, the EU finalized a new 2040 climate target deal, which entails a 90% emissions cut versus 1990 levels, but with key flexibilities. Member states will be allowed to count foreign carbon credits for up to 5% of the goal and consider another 5% in the future. Environmentalists criticize the deal for provisions that will allow the EU to buy carbon credits from less developed countries, effectively outsourcing the bloc's obligations. Now, it's also important to note that Europe's scramble for rare earths opens the door wide open to even more pollution through mining and processing. Overall, these stories reflect the tightrope Europe must walk across trade, security, and climate. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
And Brazilians are voicing outrage after a police raid late last month left more than 100 people dead. Residents are demanding an end to police violence as an investigation into the operation gets underway.
Hundreds of protesters gathered in Brazil's Rio de Janeiro on Wednesday to condemn a deadly police operation that left at least 121 people dead. The demonstration, organised by social movements, unions and lawmakers, marched towards the official residence of Rio's governor, Claudio Castro. They're demanding accountability from the local government and an end to what they describe as military incursions into favelas. The police operation on the 28th of August targeted the Comando Vermelho, Brazil's oldest active criminal organisation, as authorities moved to crack down on drug trafficking ahead of global climate events in the city. However, the activists described the raid as the deadliest in the city's history. The United Nations has also urged Brazil to reform its policing methods to ensure they comply with international standards on the use of force. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has said his government will seek an independent investigation.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump said that the US may work with Russia and China on a plan to denuclearize without providing details. Now, he called America the world's top nuclear power and warned that China could catch up within years.
Well, if you think about it, after the Second World War, they changed it to defense. We make the best equipment, the best missiles, the best rockets, the best everything. We redid our nuclear. We're the #1 nuclear power, which I hate to admit because it's so horrible. It's such a horrible situation if it ever has to be used. Russia's second. China's a distant third, but they'll catch us within 4 or 5 years. They want to catch us, and they'll be able to catch us. And we're maybe working on a plan to denuclearize the three of us. So we'll see if that works.
US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said a Supreme Court hearing on President Donald Trump's tariffs went well for the administration. The case is about whether the Republican president overstepped federal law when he used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to set sweeping import taxes. Several Supreme Court justices expressed doubts about the legality of the tax hikes, a case that could impact the global economy and test the president's powers. Bessent defended Trump's use of the tariffs as an effective foreign policy tool.
That we were at a tipping point in the economy with these trade deficits. That was a problem. And, you know, sometimes the best tariffs are the ones that never get enforced. That, you know, the president threatened 100% tariffs after the Chinese on October 8th threatened to put export controls on rare earth magnets from Chinese products that had 0.01%. Every camera, every iPhone here would have been subject to a Chinese control. Because he had the ability to threaten the 100% tariff, he was able to successfully execute on foreign policy.
Okay, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. We've covered the key developments shaping today's global and regional agenda and the stories driving tomorrow's headlines. Please do join us again tomorrow evening for more insight, analysis and perspectives from here in Baku and around the world. From all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.